As a physician leader, it's your job to have tough conversations with colleagues who have no interest in having that conversation with you. Maybe they're mistreating staff or having patient complaints, or maybe it's just that their morale is low. So where do you even begin? Dr. John Schneider is the Division Chief of Rhinology and Anterior Skull Base Surgery and Associate Professor at WashU and a Master Certified Physician Development Coach, and WashU's first Assistant Dean for faculty coaching. And he also has his own coaching practice at Physician's Mind. You know him as he's been a guest before and a guest host. But first, a word from our sponsors. You're listening to Succeed in Medicine, the show for practicing physicians who want to master the parts of their career and life that med school never prepared us for. From interpersonal skills to career navigation to the essential information every physician needs. I'm Dr. Bradley Block, and in every episode, we bring you brass tacks advice and immediately applicable insights from world-class experts, so you can feel prepared wherever your MD takes you and build a life in medicine that's sustainable, rewarding, and actually worth all those years of sacrifice. You've spent years making careful decisions with lasting impact. When it comes to investing, the same principle applies. Lightstone Direct gives you access to institutional quality real estate investments with decades of proven experience behind them. Invest directly, no middlemen, and a $12 billion plus asset under management real estate firm in your corner. Remember, all investments involve risk. Please visit lightstonedirect.com for a full list of disclosures. Dr. John Schneider, thanks so much for coming back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back, and Dr. Block.
And today as guest and not host yourself.
Yes, happy to do so.
So you and I had spoken a little while ago. Actually, you gave a coaching seminar to my practice. And one of the questions that I had asked you towards the end was, well, what about those physicians who really would benefit from coaching, but they would be resistant to it, right? Well, it wouldn't work for me. I don't have time for it. And so then this blossomed into today's topic, which is having conversations with people that do not want to have this conversation with you. And so for those in leadership positions, this is a lot of what leadership is. And so my first question is, like, where do we begin? How do you have a productive conversation with someone who doesn't want to talk to you about that subject?
Yeah. I think one of the hardest parts about this is that when you are in a leadership position, there's a lot of uniqueness to your position, number one, but also your relationship with that person, right? And so when you try to apply principles of leadership that we can read in books and we take courses from and so on and so forth, it can feel clunky, right? Because there's nuance to it and there's all these different aspects of it that are muddled. And so as a coach, when we talk about this, a lot of it has to do with really kind of asking questions in a way that gets at what they need primarily. What's hard about that is you have a vision as a leader of what is needed, right? For, say, somebody is causing conflict in our space, in the ear, nose, and throat space, conflict in the operating room, for example, and you're getting calls as the leader that this is an issue and they're not behaving well and so on. I use this example particularly because in medicine, that's where a lot of coaching started, and that's where a lot of coaching still exists, is in this idea of remediation.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is you've already raised that DEFCON level, so to speak, right, out of the gate, because very clearly that conflict has started from something that's much deeper than that, right? That the behavior and the tension and yelling and so on and so forth is starting from something much deeper that you as a leader may not necessarily be able to figure out. And so how do you start that is the question, right?
Yeah.
How do you start that?
That's a great example because like we've had interviews about conflict resolution, right? Like let's say there's an altercation between a surgeon and the scrub and you're trying to get to the heart of the conflict. You're trying to resolve that conflict. This is not that. Someone is a repeat offender. There's been complaints about them from multiple parties, and you're not looking to resolve conflict. You're looking to bring this to this person's attention that they are the problem.
You want a behavior change,
Yeah.
ultimately, right? And what's tricky about this is that in the realm of leadership, in the realm of organizational psychology, there are minimum standards, right? We have competencies that we want all of our physicians and professionals and so on to meet in terms of not being jerks and not throwing things and not yelling and so on and so forth, right? So in your mind, you're saying, okay, are we above the line or below the line? Because if we're below the line, oftentimes we get a human resources professional involved because there are just baseline competencies that have to be met.
Yeah.
Okay. And traditionally, that was the way that coaching got engaged, is that you're under that line, that you are not behaving in such a way that is meeting minimum standards for what is acceptable behavior in the workplace. That's on the extreme end. And to be fair, for us, I think it's important to say that line of minimum standards does carry with it real penalties. And so, in a sense, that's the hammer approach, right? Like, you're under the line. We've told you once, twice, three times, you're not meeting the standard. We're now involving a formal process. Work this out.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean necessarily that person is forever first with that behavior. Could they change? Yes, but it's going to take more of a formal process.
Yeah, so this person is below that line. It's already been brought to the attention. And I would imagine those conversations are somewhat similar to what we are going to talk about. But like you're saying, listen, you're a problem. We've had these complaints. This is your first warning, second warning, 3 strikes. Now we're involving HR. But let's say you've got someone who hasn't crossed that line, right? And I think that's where you're getting at, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're just kind of a dick, right?
Yeah.
Like they're short-tempered. They're hard to work with. Nobody seems to want to work with them. And it's leading to a little bit of attrition, an operating room staff, because it's just easier to work in this other surgery center where you don't have to deal with someone like that, right? Like they haven't crossed that line, but it is affecting everyone.
Right. And there's a wide range of this, right? And it's interesting because I think in the surgical world, the era of the godlike surgeon who doesn't matter what their behavior is because they're the surgeon, I think those times are relatively past, honestly.
Yeah,
I mean,
we had
at
someone
least
that was
in my
recently
opinion.
kicked out of my surgery center because of that.
Yeah.
But this was a known offender. This is with someone who had, coming from other institutions, like that was the reputation, as if this was going to be a surprise. And then it happened and they're gone. Yeah.
I turned 50 2 weeks ago, right? I mean, I'm on the,
birthday.
Thank you. I like to say sometimes that I was raised by wolves in residency, right? There's enough of us out there that were trained in the old style of training. A lot of that has gone by the wayside, right? And there really is less of this. And again, when the line is crossed, that's fine, and we can involve HR in their processes. But when it's not, when it's perception, right? People's personalities are not working well together, right? Or a patient walks away from an interaction and the physician was actually trying very hard, but somehow the wires got crossed and the interaction didn't go as well. And now you've got a patient complaint, right? That's the trickier part, right?
Yeah.
Is because I've been completely blindsided by a patient complaint thinking, my goodness, I thought we had a really good conversation, right?
Yes, that is that. And those I feel like hurt the most. Like sometimes you don't jive and you get it and you're like, well, I'm not everybody's favorite flavor. But then you were like, wait a second, I thought that went really well. We're with staff members too, right? Like, oh, I thought we got along so well.
And I see that a lot because in large part, we don't know ourselves as well as we could. And I think that is one piece of this that it is very interesting. When you go through a lot of leadership training, I just talked about this last night with my colleagues, you do these assessments along the way, right? So you do something like DISC, or when I coach people, I use something called the print. There's a tons of these, Clifton's Strengths, Hogan Assessment, right? There's a ton of these different assessments out there. It takes a lot of work and it's a lot of introspection to uncover your motivations and your tendencies and parts of your personality that you just don't really think about, but they're very automatic, right? Well, now you have big organizations, whether it's 20 people or 800 people, where you've got a lot of people who have never done this work. They may have taken Myers-Briggs in high school. That's really the most common thing that people tell me is, yeah, I took Myers-Briggs in high school. Okay.
Or they know their astrologic sign. I'm a Pisces.
But the real work, those aha moments that we see in coaching, is most of us don't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't know myself before I went through all coaching and learning all of this stuff. And boy, you learn a ton and your self-awareness grows. The reason I bring this up is that for leaders, we like to think in policies, we like to think in terms of these lines that we were talking about earlier. But the reality is that people need more self-awareness. We all need more self-awareness. And so does that open a door? That's what I'm getting at, right? Does that open a door for leaders to say, okay, I recognize that we're having an issue, whatever the issue that may be. If I take the traditional approach of, okay, I see we're having an issue, so I'm going to draw the line. Now you've increased the conflict, right? Because you set the binary. I don't know how many podcasts ago on this podcast, I interviewed Amanda Ripley for her book, High Conflict. And this was
Probably like 6 months ago at this point.
Yeah, it's a while. She's amazing. Highly recommend the book, but she really highlights this idea of the binary because we need simplicity when we're thinking about hard things. It's really, really, really hard to approach a conversation with a colleague or someone you lead about complex communication issues or patient dissatisfaction or sticky, complex, conflictual things and not want to reduce it to simple terms that you can understand and that they can understand so it's easier to communicate. We all do it, right? I did this recently, and it's really ingrained in us to reduce it to simple binary things. You're over here, and I need you over here. The problem with that is, as complex as we are and as complex as these interactions are, is it really reducible to that? And so that's where the question asking, I think, becomes so much more powerful, right? Is in approaching someone and saying, Brad, we got this patient complaint, right? It's not the first one. And I just want to get your sense of what's going on. And inviting them into a conversation about what they're experiencing, you don't know where it's going to end up, right? You don't know where that conversation is going to go. But there's a big difference between starting with, you're under the line and you need to change your behavior or else, to tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
Right.
So the strategy that you're describing is you're inviting introspection. Like you're trying to help them to become more introspective. And you do that by asking them questions. Then we lose control over the narrative because we are allowing things to unfold rather than directing them, which I think for most of us is a really challenging thing to do.
And it's a leadership tension, right? Because leadership often is defined by control in a lot of ways, right? Because you may be accountable to somebody else and they need you to take care of this, right? Especially if you're kind of a mid-level leader. I like that you brought up narrative because I think that that's really, really important here, right? We are always going to bring a narrative of this that we formed in our head, right? And we formed that narrative of the behavior of this other person through our own experiences, through our interactions with that person, and we could be totally wrong, right? But if we are not self-aware enough to say, I might be totally wrong, we're never going to start with the correct mindset to be able to discover the true facts and the true narrative.
Yeah. I think in the past, if I've had conversations like this, I've tried to help them save face by saying, is there anything that's going on that could be leading to this? Like, is there anything in the office or anything in the operating room? Is there anything going on? And allowing them to kind of sidestep the issue. But I think the way that you're doing it is you're just removing all assumptions and just saying, as you said, what do you think is going on here?
And it's tricky. It's tricky. Out of the gate, if you're a leader and you're coming to somebody you lead with a question like this, you have to know in your heart of hearts that immediately they're going to be defensive. And I think that that's reasonable of all of us, right? If somebody points out that we're doing something wrong or scolds us in some way, well, there's always a defensive reaction.
I think the phrase is nobody wants to hear that their kids are ugly.
So we could do hours on this, but there's a lot of psychology behind this. And I think we talked about this when I presented this idea of the drama triangle and the empowerment dynamic. Really powerful concepts around that help with this issue. And so the drama triangle, where we as individuals can exist as victim, persecutor, or rescuer, when we're talking about conflict as a leader and someone we lead, when that drama triangle is playing out in a huge way,
Yeah.
it derails the conversation because we roll back and forth. And so when I train coaches here at Washington University in St. Louis, one of the things that we do is we watch videos of movies. And so there's a movie, and oh my God, I'm blanking on it now, and I'll have to get it for you, but it's Kate Blanchett and Judi Dench in this movie. And they're going back and forth about something. And I asked everybody, what do you think is going on here relative to the drama triangle? And you could see a person would shift. I'm the victim. Don't hurt me. Now I'm going to persecute you because you're attacking me, right? And now I'm going to rescue myself. And it's like this stuff goes on. I mean, these psychologists know what they're talking about,
Yeah.
right? As a leader, if you're aware of these types of models and how it is really relevant to a lot of professional interactions, you can change to a different style that brings out better thinking, more self-awareness, and better conversation that can actually help people. And in the process, you actually empower them, which I think is the other aspect of this.
If you like this podcast episode, you're going to love the other shows over at the Doctor Podcast Network. For instance, The Scalpel and Sword, hosted by Dr. Lee Nagendran Sharma, a previous guest on this show, who discussed conflict resolution. Covers topics like industrial psychology and personal development, ethics, and you guessed it, conflict resolution in healthcare. Check out Scalpel and Sword. So in staying out of the drama triangle, we want to have humility, right? We want to lose our assumptions and allow them to figure out what's going on so that they can help themselves. But I'm just picturing situations where we encounter resistance, right? Like,
Sure.
So what do you think?
Sure.
I don't know. You know what? I don't even want to talk about it. Like you're encountering resistance to them even opening up the situation, right? So how do you push past this?
This is where it takes a fair amount of practice. I would never say that I'm perfect at this. Just while I think about it for the listeners, there's a book by the author William Ury, U-R-Y. And William Ury was this conflict negotiator all across the world. One of the true masters of this. Dealt with Hugo Chavez and people like really high up government level stuff. And he really used this kind of empowerment dynamic coach approach because when somebody says no, when somebody says, I don't want to talk about it, when somebody says there's nothing to change, practice leaders need is the agility to ask different questions. Because if somebody really does say no, and I've done that with leaders in the past, and I look back at myself and I think, gosh, you were really shutting down, right? Like you were really shutting down because you didn't want to talk about the painful thing, right? You didn't want to talk about the thing that might scare you or the thing that's so stressful for you that this is the way that stress is manifesting in your behavior, right? As a leader, you're in a difficult position because your relationship with that person matters, right? The way that they are going to open up about what is driving this behavior, there's a very fundamental pillars that have to be met, which is psychological safety. They have to feel safe enough to tell you what's really going on, right? They have to trust you, right? And that's hard to do. You really have to build it as a leader. And so we actually teach leaders here about psychological safety and trust. And we reinforce this idea that you have to build this. One of the tricky parts about organizations, I think, that's so fascinating is when you become a leader, as you have recently, right? There's this leadership handbook sort of that's given to you and says, this is how you do it. It's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah. Like when you join the university and you've got to sign the handbook.
Right.
I read the handbook.
Right. But the reality is, right, your concerns, your worries, your insecurities, your stresses, all of those things in fields like medicine where you're not supposed to appear weak, you're supposed to appear in control, you're supposed to be the expert, all of those things, those are diametrically opposed, right? You can't be vulnerable
Yeah.
and be the expert, right? So this is complex, right? Because there's a lot of behavioral stuff built into when somebody says no, or somebody is resistant, because it's years and years of reinforcement of behaviors that aren't going to get them very far.
Sorry, is there a difference between those who genuinely don't believe that there's a problem and those who just aren't ready to admit that there's a problem? Are those the same person
Yeah,
just in different stages, or are these two fundamentally different people?
it's a great question. You don't know out of the gate.
Okay.
And so are there people? Yes, absolutely. I've seen it happen. People who literally, it wouldn't matter if they had 70 years of coaching, they would never get there. That they're fundamentally convinced of their own greatness, that they can do no wrong, that people should adjust to them rather than them adjusting to other people, right? Those people exist. There's no doubt. But in the initial conversations, that person is difficult to find relative to somebody who is behaving a certain way to hide stresses or concerns or insecurities or whatever it may be that is resulting in the same observed behavior, right? That's where kind of a coach approach, I think, really does help, because you start to just pull away the curtain a little bit. If you find somebody who is obstinate, resistant, unwilling to change, and doesn't believe that they might be wrong, that's a one category of people.
Yeah.
And I do think that those people need different handling. My guess is that's a minority. I don't think that's actually a lot of people, because I do think, and again, maybe this is faith in people. And I think as a coach, I tend to have more of that.
Great to hear that coaching has given you more faith in people and not less.
Yeah, absolutely. No, because you see moments when people change.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've said this before, is that I actually will have an emotional reaction. I mean, I won't burst into tears, but like I can feel myself when you see somebody fundamentally change the way they think about themselves in a good way, right? It's empowering. A lot of us in medicine, and again, I don't want to get too far into this because this could be a whole other podcast, but those resistant people, they're not only managing their own stresses, they're also managing a lot of autonomy issues and agency issues that are frankly more and more plaguing professionals in general. Our poor nursing colleagues this week, you heard about this, right?
They lost their professional status. Yeah.
What is this?
I mean, the huge deal with that is that affects their ability to take out loans, right? Which is, there's a nursing shortage. Great. So now we don't allow them to take it. That's a separate issue. But yeah.
It's a very big, right.
Yeah. To then have that taken away from you.
Right.
This is how we see you.
And unfortunately, medicine has suffered more and more broadly, not just for physicians, but for nurses, for MAs, for lab techs, whomever it is, that the empowerment of choosing this profession has been eroded in a lot of ways. And so when I approach people when they're behaving badly or they're resistant to change, I try to remind myself that in a very fundamentally human way, a lot of us just don't feel like we have agency in our own careers. And that creates a lot of resistance, I think.
So I want to bring it back to the initial question that I asked you that sparked this conversation, which was, so we've been talking about really people who, as you said earlier, they're not going to get a call from HR, but there needs to be a conversation, right? Because they've been a problem. But what about the physicians who are not? They see their patient, there aren't complaints about them, but they're just unhappy. And that they would benefit from coaching, but they're just not sold on it. I don't think it works. I don't have time for it. I'm never going to change. So this is a little bit of a different conversation than we were talking about.
Right. Resistance to change is a fundamental piece of both of these groups. It is that I'm not going to change because you're not going to make me. I don't need to. And what you just said, which is, I don't think the change is going to be worth it, which is subtle, right? Which is, why should I change? Why should I put forth more effort to change myself, the way I think, my time, my schedule, the way I talk to people? Like, think about all of the things that people think about having to change to adapt to the environment or whatever. but they don't see the inherent value of it. Those are the people, I think, that really struggle with the dissatisfaction in our profession and other professions, right? Is
Absolutely.
because it's hard to perceive that after all of the effort that you did to get here, that there's still a lot more to do, right? Now, you can go off and say, that's a failure of our professional training. We should be moving that change piece earlier. I don't disagree. And I actually think there are a lot of people out there doing really good work in this, in medical education and nursing education, to try to understand better how we prepare people for the complexities of the work that we do as medical professionals. Nonetheless, there's a bit of inspiration that people need in this idea that, yeah, things are hard and things are challenging and we need change, and you're going to benefit from it, right? The problem is when you come as a leader or as an organization, that message doesn't always get delivered necessarily, right? I have a colleague, I should actually get him on your show because he's amazing. He's another ENT, but he did his PhD in education. And he did this wonderful workshop called The Hero's Journey. It's this idea about professional identity. We're going to connect you to,
Yes,
for sure.
absolutely.
And as I was listening to him, and I'm not going to steal his thunder here and explain what he does because he's obviously the expert, but in a sense, we devote ourselves to this. Physicians, nurses, whomever, this was a calling. This really was a calling at one point. And we lose that inspiration to come to work every day because of the endless policies and the endless metrics and the endless kind of organizational weight of things, right? The reality is we can't get rid of it, right? This is medicine. This is the way things are. There's certainly room for discussion about whether that's the way we should continue to go. But it doesn't mean that we can't still find that inspiration, right? So people, all of us need to know that the change means something, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for leaders is probably the biggest message of this, is when you're trying to inspire change, right? Not just force it, but really inspire change. You have to invite everybody to participate, not just for face value, right?
Yeah.
But so that they see the value of it.
But that's the hard part. How do you get them
It
to see
is.
the, other than leading by example, right? But,
Mhm.
I can see the answer being, well, that's you. That's the type of person you are. Clearly, you're that type of person. That's how you ended up in this leadership position. I'm just not that person. It's not in my
Right.
DNA.
Helping them have doors. And again, it's offering the door. This is really right.
Yeah.
Forcing people to walk through doors to
You can't
change.
push them through. Yeah.
It just doesn't
You
work.
just really want to, but yeah.
Yeah, right. But conversations about change can open those doors.
Yeah.
When I see leadership changes happen in institutions, I think one of the biggest things that we all wait for when leadership changes is, who's this person, this leader going to be to me? Are they going to support me? Are they going to help me? Am I going to trust them? Leaders have to be very conscious of this, not in a manipulative way, right? But really, these are the folks that you are leading. They are the people you are helping to make the organization better, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of this stuff out there, books and seminars and so on and so forth. But I know from coaching that when people really feel the psychological safety and trust, but they also feel like you as the leader are with them and you believe in them, right? It just starts to open those doors. And it's not the final door, right? But it may be the first door to them thinking differently about their situation and saying, okay, maybe I could do this one small thing.
And I think this is where the term coach applies, because it makes me think of a team coach, right?
Right.
That's the function of the team coach, is you're really going to care about the individual players, like not just the team, but the individual players on and off the field in a very Ted Lasso kind of way.
Yeah.
Is what it made me think of, like the Lasso way, right? Like
Yeah,
caring about them
absolutely.
on and off the field. If you do the same thing for your colleagues and your employees, then that is going to help them to see the door. Because the goal is to get them to walk through by just making it more available. And it's not always going to happen. And the goal shouldn't be for them to go through the door. The goal should just be to present it to them in a way that's meaningful to them and
Right.
just hope that it works.
My favorite diagram in all of coaching and communication and everything is the quadrants of challenge and support. And I think I
Yep.
put this in my presentation. This idea that if you challenge somebody but don't support them, they retreat.
Yeah.
You're disciplining them without helping them, right? If you support them but don't challenge them, they never grow. They never change. They don't want to change. Why would they want to change?
Yeah.
And yeah, some people might argue this is simplistic, but I think it's really powerful as for leaders as we think about, I need to challenge this person, right? I know that change could help them and help them within our organization. Am I supporting through that? And that's a very difficult question for all of us as leaders to ask ourselves, because sometimes that's a really hard question to ask ourselves, right?
And also
Am
in
I
a way
support-
that they want and need to be supported, not in the way that you
Right.
choose to support them. It's got to
Right.
be on their terms, which is again taking away that narrative, like that this is how we
Right.
want to lead. Fantastic. Well, this is an amazing conversation, and
Yeah.
it's certainly going to influence the way that I lead. You alluded to it earlier, but I'll just let the listeners know I was elected to the board of my practice, ENT and Allergy Associates. We're the biggest ENT practice in the country, so I'm one of 7 board members, and I'll be serving for the next 3 years in that leadership position. So I will be having some of these conversations, and so I appreciate your insight here, and I will definitely be applying it. And if the listeners want to get a hold of you, right, you have a new website that's up and running, and so what is that?
Website's still in the works, but
still-
my program is called the Physician's Mind Coaching. My email is john@physiciansmind.com. And I have my own coaching practice in addition to still treating patients. So it's a lot of fun. And more importantly, whether it's me or another coach, coaches really are an incredible asset for all of us as physicians to be able to find the career and life that we want, truly.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for all you do for our profession and physicians, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Brett.
Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means either you fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please write us a 5-star review, take a screenshot, and email it to me so I can send you a quick guide on how to earn patient trust in 20 seconds or less. Email me at brad@physiciansguidetodoctoring.com and feel free to suggest a topic or guest. I take your requests seriously. The views expressed on this episode are those of the interviewer and the interviewee and do not represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting makes it sound like I'm talking directly to you, this is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or legal advice, or really any advice. Thanks again for listening to Succeed in Medicine.